Hello, my name is Emma. You can call me Em, and I have a story to share with you. And this is my favourite story. Now, I know every time I share a story with you, I say this is one of my favourite stories, which is true. Every story I tell is one of my favourites because it would be very strange for me to tell you stories I didn't like. But this story is a favourite among favourites for a lot of reasons. But one of them is because it's the very first story I ever told. So, maybe it's time. It is time, in fact, for me to share it with you. You ready? It goes like this. In a certain place in a certain time, there was a certain palace with a certain king, and this king was very, very old. I cannot overemphasize how old this king was. His beard went right down to the ground, his hair was whiter than white, and his wrinkles had wrinkles. He was ancient, but he was kind, and he was considerate and compassionate too, and so was beloved by all the people in his kingdom. But, as I said, he was ancient. And what's more, he had no children or siblings or spouse, and so no one was quite sure who would become king when he inevitably died. So all his counsellors and advisors and ministers crossed their arms and furrowed their brows and scratched their chins trying to work out this problem with the matter of succession. And they were also busy trying to solve this problem with the matter of succession that the kingdom was invaded by a horde of Vikings. And the Viking ship came into the port, and they trampled from the port and through the city and over the street and over the street and up the hill, right up to the palace gates, where they banged and they bashed, demanding an audience with the king. Now, the king was not in the habit of letting just anyone who demanded it have an audience with him, but when he saw their broadswords and their battle axes, he changed his mind. And so the horde of Vikings came into the throne room, and there was the very old king on his simple wooden throne. And from that great mass of Vikings, one stepped forth and said, "I am Odd." And the king looked up at this Viking and said, "You look pretty normal to me." And the Viking said, "No, you misunderstand. My name is Odd." And the old king said, "Oh, well, I'm sure in your local language it's very normal because you're foreign to me." No, you misunderstand. My name is Odd, and Odd is my name. I'm Odd, chief of these Vikings, and I've come to challenge you to a duel. Whoever wins the duel will be king, and whoever loses the duel will be dead. Now, the very old king was not in the habit of agreeing to duels to the death to just anyone who demanded it of him. But when he saw the Vikings' broadswords and battle axes, he changed his mind. And so the next day there was a duel between Odd, chief of the Vikings, and the very old king. There was much clashing and clanging and banging and bashing and sound and noise and I don't know what else, and whether it was because of the duel or old age, I don't know. But at the end, the old king had died, and Odd was crowned king. And even though nobody knew where Odd had come from or knew anything about Odd at all, to be honest, they all soon found that Odd was a pretty good king. Taxes were low, roads were well kept, there was enough food for everyone. It was pretty good. But then came the first winter of King Odd's reign. You see, this kingdom was in the very northern parts of the world where the winters are long and cold and dark, and so it had become a custom, a tradition in this place, that if a traveller was making their way and winter was afoot, that traveller could knock on a stranger's front door and ask to be their winter guest of the household. And if the household felt they could, they'd welcome you in like a long-lost aunt or distant cousin and give you warmth and shelter and company until winter had passed and you could continue on your way. And in the first winter of King Odd's reign, someone knocked on the palace front door and asked to be Odd's winter guest. "You can be my guest the whole of winter if you like," said Odd, "on one condition. You must guess my deepest secret on the first day of summer, and if you don't, you'll be beheaded." Well, the traveller thought this was a somewhat strange arrangement, but it'd just be the two of them in the palace. How hard could it be? And so agreed. And through the long, cold, dark winter, there was much music and merriment and food and wine and warmth, shelter and story, and then, on the first day of summer, Odd summoned the guests into the room and said, "Well, have you guessed my deepest secret?" And the guests said, "No." And they were beheaded. But except for that one beheading, the rest of the year was perfectly normal. Taxes were low, roads were all kept, there was enough food for everyone, public transport was made free, it was delightful. And then came the second winter of King Odd's reign, and someone else knocked on the palace front door and asked to be Odd's winter guest. "You can be my guest for the whole of winter if you like," said Odd, "on one condition. You must guess my deepest secret by the first day of summer, and if you don't, you'll be beheaded." Well, the second traveller was rather good at puzzles, and so they agreed. And through the long, cold, dark winter, there was much music and merriment, food and wine, warmth, shelter and story, and then, on the first day of summer, Odd summoned the guests into the throne room and said, "Well, have you guessed my deepest secret?" And the traveller said, "No." It was beheaded. But except for that one beheading, the rest of the year was perfectly normal. Taxes were low, roads were well paved, there was enough food for everyone, public transport was free, university was being free too. It was great. But then came the third winter of King Odd's reign, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth. For 6 years, there were 6 travellers who all asked to be Odd's winter guest, and for 6 years, Odd made them the same conditions. "You must guess my deepest secret by the first day of summer, and if you don't, you'll be beheaded." And for 6 years, the 6 travellers said yes, and for 6 years, on the first day of summer, there was a beheading. And so after the 6th one, everyone in the kingdom was starting to get a bit antsy about Odd. I mean, sure, taxes were low and roads were well kept and public transport was free and universities free and there's plenty of food to go around, but there's all these beheadings. Not quite sure about that. And so everyone came to an agreement. They all decided they'd wait 1 more year. If for the 7th year there was a 7th beheading, they would overthrow the monarchy. Completely get rid of the king or queen or anyone who would become a republic. Be great. But only if there was 1 more beheading. They gave Odd 1 more chance. Well, come the 7th winter of King Odd's reign, someone knocks on the palace front door and asks to be Odd's winter guest. "You can be my guest for the whole of winter if you like," said Odd, "on one condition. You must guess my..." Do you remember? Yes. "Deepest secret by the first day of summer, and if you don't, you'll be beheaded." "I know," said the guest. "We all know. I'll agree to your conditions if you agree to mine." "And what are your conditions?" "For the whole of the winter, you and I must share a bed." Well, that's a bit odd. All right. It's a deal. And so the travellers welcomed into the palace as Odd's winter guest. And through the long, cold, dark winter, there was much music and merriment, food, wine, warmth, shelter, and story. And then, finally, on Christmas Eve. I know, it was surprising. On Christmas Eve, at the stroke of midnight, the bells rang out, and Odd threw off the covers of their shared bed and ran out of the palace. And the winter guests knew this had something to do with Odd's secret, so followed in hot pursuit. The traveller followed Odd out of the palace and down the hill and through the streets and through the city and past the port, through a forest, into a bog, and in that bog there was a great big frozen lake. And the winter guest watched as Odd jumped high into the air and landed into that bog with her. Nothing. Not a sound, not a sight, not a ripple, nothing. Odd just disappeared. And the winter guest knew this had something to do with Odd's secret, and so jumped high in turn and landed into that lake with her. Nothing. Not a sound, not a sight, not a ripple. You see, at midnight, on Christmas Eve, this was no ordinary frozen lake in a bog, near a forest, near a city. This was a magic portal. A portal that took Odd and that winter guest through to the Netherworld, also known as Elfheim, also known as Fairy. And in that place, all the sounds were sweeter and the smells were more intense and the colours were brighter, and, well, the winter guest nearly got enthralled by it all but could see Odd running off in the distance, and the winter guest knew this had something to do with Odd's secret, and so followed Odd over hill, through dale, left and right, through valley and forest, until finally, Odd joined a procession, leaving a church and going to a great big banquet hall. And the winter guests stayed close behind and followed that procession into the hall. And there, everyone started to sit around that table in that banquet hall. And there were all sorts of elves and fairies and gnomes and trolls and pitskis and sprites and tomter and all sorts of wonderful creatures. And in the very center of the table sat the king of the elves himself. And who sat on the king's right side but Odd? Well, the winter guest found a empty chair next to a sleeping troll just a little bit away so they could listen to Odd and the king of the elves' conversation. And as they talked and talked and talked and talked, it dawned on the winter guest that Odd was not a mysterious king. Odd was not a wicked Viking chief. Odd was, in fact, queen of the elves, and to be put under a curse. And the only way the curse could be broken is if humans, someone from up above, could guess her secret on the first day of summer within 7 years. This was her final chance to return home, to return to being herself. Well, with this secret tucked safe in their heart, the winter guests left the table, careful to not wake the sleeping troll, and left that banquet hall past the church and through forest and valley and over hill, over dell, jumped back through that lake with her. Nothing, not a sound, not a sight, not a ripple, and ran from that lake through the bog, past the forest, through the city, past the port, through the street, up over the hill, into the pass, through every single room, out through every corridor, pulled into the bed, covers right up to their chin. And Odd crept in behind, apparently none the wiser. While the rest of the long, cold, dark winter, there's much music and merriment, food, wine, warmth, shelter, and story, and then, truly and finally, on the first day of summer, Odd summoned the guest into the throne room and said, "Well, my friend, have you guessed my deepest secret?" And the winter guest said, "Yes. You are not who you appear to be. You are far from your home. You are, in fact, Odd, queen of the elves." And the moment those words left the winter guest's lips, there was a flash and a tinkling of bells. An Odd, wicked king and mysterious Viking chief had disappeared. And instead, there stood in all her beauty, Odd, queen of the elves. She had long dark hair, bright eyes, a beautiful green dress I can barely describe, so I won't. And she smiled and thanked the winter guest over and over for breaking the curse on her and offered anything as a reward, but the winter guest didn't want anything. "Oh no, you must have something," said Odd. And then she realized if she returned to her kingdom down below, then this kingdom up above wouldn't have a king. And this winter guest was kind, considerate, certainly curious, and would probably make a wise and wonderful monarch. And so Odd crowned that winter guest as king of the realm and then vanished. Well, everyone in the kingdom was very confused and startled to find that not only had Odd disappeared without a trace and no one was saying anything about it, but there was now a new king that they knew nothing about. Well, give them a year, see how they go, and soon they found that the new king was just as kind and considerate and compassionate as the very old king had once been, maybe even more, and became beloved by everyone. And some time passed, and the new king was getting married, and because this kingdom was very small, everyone was invited to the wedding, and everyone gathered into the royal cathedral, and everyone was excited and celebrating and saying hello to everyone else, and everyone knew everyone else, and well, except there was one person at the very back of the church who nobody recognized and who wasn't on the invitation list. Someone with long dark hair, bright eyes, a beautiful green dress I can barely describe, so I won't, who gave a knowing look to the king, and the king gave a knowing look back. And that was the last anyone heard or saw of Odd, queen of the elves. It's a pretty good story, isn't it? It's got everything you want. It's got adventure, elves, magic, Vikings, Christmas, and summer too. Perfect things to make up a perfect story, at least as far as I'm concerned. I'm glad I got to share it with you. Telling stories and sharing stories is a gift. Sure, I love to tell them, but it's no fun telling them to myself. It's fun when I get to tell them to others, and it's just as much fun when someone else gets to tell a story to me. So I hope you share this story. I hope you try and tell this story yourself. Or maybe you might turn it into a book, or a poem, or a play. Who knows? The world is your oyster. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining in. I hope you have a safe and adventurous and calm and wondrous new year. And I'll see you in the soup.